co-teaching, where the coach and the teacher teach together, we see as, and there's some evidence, can be helpful in supporting teachers' initial implementation or enactment of particular practices. If the teacher has some vision of what a good high-quality launch looks like, maybe the coach and the teacher work to launch a task together. And observing instruction and giving feedback, which was the default that coaches do, we see only when the teacher is already pretty sophisticated and you're wanting to give feedback to tweak or tune a particular practice. And I think when you look at the sort of activities like this, you can see why coach is a reasonable name for somebody in that job. They are really coaching. And there's one more I want to mention, if I can just have a drink. The coaching cycle, and this is actually late breaking news from friends of ours at the University of Pittsburgh. Coaching cycle has 3 phases: a pre-conference where typically the teacher and the coach plan a lesson, work in the classroom, and then they analyze afterwards. This can be extremely productive, but that initial pre-conference has to bring together content, clarifying the mathematical learning goals as specifically as possible, brings together instruction, and it brings together students' reasoning, which are in effect the 3 aspects of formative assessment, right? So it's going to talk about, so here's the learning goals, here's what we're going to do, here's what we anticipate and how students might solve, or the rationale for those tasks will be in terms of students learning with respect to the learning goals. So those sorts of dialogues. So a big part of the skill of a coach in those conversations would be to scaffold, to press, to support the teachers in making those sorts of connections. Then we would typically, coaching cycle just involves observation and feedback. We see a place where it might also involve modeling, or it could involve co-teaching. But even in those cases, there is value in having an initial planning meeting and then having a subsequent analysis where you're figuring out not just how did it go, general impressions, but what specifically did the students learn. You might be looking at the student work, but it's not just an analysis of students' work for its own sake. You're relating it to what happened in the lesson, to the instruction, and against that basis, developing ideas for how to do it better next time. So it's that sort of cyclic process. So that would be one-on-one coaching. I could go through this for working for groups, or I can skip it. I can skip it. You know, you just get a similar. Okay. I want to be don't want to bore people into submission. Basically, I think a lot of people here are pretty familiar with lesson study, where there's a group of teachers who plan a lesson together, 1 or maybe 2 co-teach the lesson, the others observe, and then they have an analysis. We see that as very much an analog to the one-on-one coaching cycle. So in other words, there's a lot of activities and stuff flying around here, but I think underneath it all, there are a couple of core principles. And one is this idea of the pre-planning, where you're linking content, instruction, and student reasoning, and so on. Same with the engaging in lesson study. There's also evidence of the value of engaging teachers in math, but not just to learn math. It's focusing on tasks they're going to use in the classroom to pull out the big ideas, or in Kuno's paper, what math can kids learn by working on this problem, to explicate the mathematical possibilities, anticipating kids' solutions, and so forth. Analyzing student work, again, we're not psychologists. We don't need a catalogue of kids' strategies for their own sake. It's relating students developing thinking to the instruction in which they are participating. The goal is to do a better job to improve how we support their learning. And then classroom video, we think of that as going the other way around, analyzing the instruction and linking it to students' learning. Where you might, so ideally you'd want the video and you'd want the student work as well. So those are the activities for which we found evidence that they can be productive in supporting teachers' learning. We also worried about coaching expertise. Yeah, everybody agrees coaches need to be accomplished teachers. I think it's pretty obvious they need to have productive views of their students' current mathematical capabilities. And what else? But we also did some work on this and drew together the literature to look at what else? People talk about relationship building skills. What does that mean? Clearly, it's essential teachers actually trust coaches to help them improve their instruction. And there's a type of position in this country, the name I've forgotten, the supervisors or something? Subject advisors. And I understand their role is quite heavily evaluative. If that's true, could be wrong, and it stays away, this is a problem if they're expected to be coaches at the same time. I think this is not particularly challenging to figure out. And so in the coaching position, at least in the States, their role is clearly purely to support teachers. They're not going to run off and talk to the principal about what's happening and so on and so forth. And I think for us, it's important to appreciate that it can be really tough, hard for teachers to make their work public, their classroom work, particularly to share their current problems of practice. And at least in my experience in the States of working with groups, that can take a while to establish those norms within the group. But that's not only okay, that's positively desirable because it moves the entire boat forward, supports the learning of the group. Something else that's critical is coaches need to be able to negotiate improvement goals with teachers, goals for teachers' own learning. You can imagine if you've got a pretty professional teacher and a coach steams in, observes a lesson, tells the teacher what the flaws are and says, right, we're going to work on this first. It's probably not going to go well. Again, we have to be in the business of nurturing, fostering teachers' motivation to want to work to improve their learning. And so the improvement goals have to be personal goals for teachers, or have to become personal goals. So there's a lot of listening to what and taking teachers' concerns seriously. And so I think of it as a bobbing and weaving to find a fit. If the coach observes a lesson and sees some areas to work on, and the teacher's concerns, trying to find a fit or negotiate a fit. That is absolutely crucial, and I think it's also vital for establishing relations of trust. We're on the same team, we're working together. Also, another skill which is non-trivial, pressing and supporting teachers to explain their pedagogical reasoning while maintaining that trust. So you have to judge how hard to press, especially in the early stages of a relationship. It's pressing teachers, if they talk about what their kids do, trying to press them to give more detailed explanations of what kids did, why they think the kids did that, relating it to instruction and so on and so forth. This is non-trivial work. So that was the coaching, some of the sort of capabilities beyond just being a good teacher we think are important. And it can give some orientation to coach professional development. There's a lot more. I will just say that the work I'm involved in right now as a student, where we are working with the folks in our home district, Nashville Metro, to co-design and co-lead series of professional development sessions for their middle grades math coaches. We did that last year, and we're going to do it this year as a full-bore design experiment. And so this is an issue dear to my heart. One of the people I work with on this project is Ilana Horn, whose work focuses specifically on teacher collaboration. Her finding parallels in many ways what we've been seeing about coaching. she's got a taxonomy in the book of sort of levels of sophistication or whatever of teacher collaborative groups in terms of the issues they focus on and how the teachers work together. And most of the groups are not likely to be able to support teachers' development of ambitious practice. The big delineator is if they actually focus on students' thinking and relate it to instruction. So again, there's this single common theme that keeps coming out as key characteristics. When there were productive groups, almost invariably they had a facilitator, and almost invariably that facilitator was a coach. So yes, teacher collaboration can be really important. It's potentially productive support, but you have to invest to stand them up initially. Simply organizing times for teachers to work together during the school day is not sufficient. And it talks again about, I will skip that, about what are the types of roles of the facilitator and so forth. Last thing we looked at was teacher advice networks. We had surveys for not just the teachers in our study, but for all the teachers in their school, all 300 of them. And we asked them, who do you turn to for advice about instruction? And they put in the name and what that person's position was. Teacher, coach, or whatever. How frequently do you turn to that person for advice? And they put, it might be daily, twice a week, month, whatever. There was a scale, and they put those options in. And then analyze those data. And one of the questions we asked is, we would like, ideally, teachers to turn for advice to somebody who's developed more sophisticated practice. If they do that, does that support their learning? And the answer is yes, it does. There's an association between turning to a colleague with more sophisticated practices and improvement in your own practices. And notice, this is something that districts can get for free. School systems can get for free. This is something teachers just do. So what influences whether teachers turn to colleagues for advice, particularly those with more sophisticated practice? Is it teacher collaborative time, perhaps? Well, not necessarily. The amount of teacher collaborative time, how many hours a week or whatever they meet, makes no difference. What does make a difference is the quality of the teacher collaborative time. If you are in one of those relatively rare productive groups, that tends to influence the extent to which teachers turn to more sophisticated colleagues for advice. And it turns out those advice-seeking relationships tend to last for at least a year. When folks did a follow-up analysis. So mercifully, we're getting near the end of this. You've been such troopers. In terms of that teacher learning subsystem, I just want to say we see a key role for the coach in holding the bits of it together. They can play a leadership role and pull out professional development. Might not be the lead designer, but they can be involved and know what's going on in that, pull out professional development. They can lead or at least participate in teacher collaborative meetings. And they can work with teachers one-on-one in their classrooms. And if they're doing that, they can also feed that information back to guide the focus, the design of pull-out professional development. So right now we see a lot of value in this coach position. At the same time, we realize this is quite expensive for places with limited resources. So again, I want to stress, I have not come here to say, hey, wake up, this is what you need to do. This is sharing findings from our experience, putting it in Hopper. The way when we work with districts, the first thing we do is say, what are you trying to achieve? And trying to understand their problems, their issues, their constraints, what strengths they have, and so on which to build. And it would be very much in that spirit that we go about this. I will plug the book one more time by saying the first piece I did about the measures is one chapter. I've given an overview of about this flyby of about 4 chapters that focus on the teacher learning subsystem with there are separate chapters on all of these various pieces. And if you're interested in some of these resources, there's a website where we've got redacted feedback reports, the interview protocols, the surveys, and so forth, and they're all downloadable.